in the Life with Kaka Studios.
Yes.
But I'm so excited to have you on the show. I get like very giddy when I get to talk to people that I've worked with personally and have them on and get to have this like new context of having a dialogue with someone. So thank you for saying yes. I know you're very, very busy being a fancy
Thanks for
producer.
inviting.
Of course, of course. So I'd love to just kind of dig in and jump right in with you and learn how you got started, how you found this industry, and when, at what point did you go, I think filmmaking, I think producing specifically, that's where I want to be.
Great. Well, I definitely grew up as the kid that all I did was watch movies and TV, where my parents would drop me off at a Blockbuster video, and I would spend 6 hours walking around the aisles and looking at billing blocks and watching the
Yeah,
films that were playing there, which unfortunately doesn't exist
I
anymore.
know.
But to this
Tremendous loss. Tremendous loss.
but that was truly one of my favorite things to do, or to be dropped off at the movie theaters on a Saturday, at 10 a.m. and get picked up at 5 p.m. and just seeing, three movies a day. Part of it was because I grew up in Houston, and it was so hot and humid, and I just, like to be indoors, but I just love telling stories. I always have. I remember fourth grade, I won the creative writing award, and that's the only academic award I ever won. And I still have that award. I'm really proud of it, and I tell my daughter's going into fourth grade, and I keep telling her about it. So
Yeah.
I've always been a storyteller, but I never thought of it as a career really until college. I sort of had the kind of traditional path was, I was an honor student, and I was lucky I got to go to Vanderbilt, and I was accepted early and got in and went there and was an economics major with the plan to move back home and, hopefully get a job at Enron, which was like sort of what everyone in Houston tried to do.
Hmm.
Well, watch the Alex Gibney movie about what happened to Enron. But
Yeah.
when I was in college, I really hated my major and really felt sort of this need to not just go back and follow the blueprint that I had sort of created for myself, and started taking film classes. And it started with like a history of film, and then a philosophy of film, and just essentially any film class that existed at Vanderbilt I took. And there weren't a lot, but I became friendly with two professors there who I'm still friends with, 20 years later. And, the long story short is we ended up building out a film studies minor at Vanderbilt, where, most minors you needed, I think, 18 credits. Well, I ended up
Hmm.
graduating with 33 credits in film studies.
Wow.
Uh, and I had a 4.0 in all my film studies classes, and, a 3.0 in everything else. And so junior year in college, I came home Thanksgiving, and I sort of did this presentation for my parents explaining that I want to be a creative producer. I had like a PowerPoint, and that's what I want to do. And I didn't really know what that meant. And my parents were very supportive. I'm very lucky.
Yeah.
They knew that my path was going to be different than sort of the rest of my family. And they said, we don't know what that means or how to help, but we're here to support you. And, worst case scenario, you're 25 years old, and you move back home and start over. It's not the end of the world.
Yeah.
Now, fast forward, I'm 41, and I've been in LA for 17 years. But so,
Crushing it.
sorry, my dog's home.
All
Uh,
good.
uh, after after college, I moved to New York, and let me let him out. Hold on. After college, I moved to New York, and quickly was able to sort of talk myself into a job at Miramax.
Yeah.
And the way that I got that job was essentially a friend of my brother's was working there. He got me the interview, and the boss, the guy who I ended up accepting the job with, said, "I'm not going to hire someone who graduated college 2 weeks ago." And I said, "Why is that?" And he goes, "Well, you don't know anything about the industry. You don't know who the players are." And I said, "Well, ask me a question." And he started asking me, who is Michael Ovitz? Who is this? How did this start? What is Sundance? All this. And I knew all the answers. And he goes, "Well, how do you know all this?" And I go, "I've been subscribing to Variety since sophomore year in college, and I would get the Gotham print edition of Variety 3 days late in college." And my boss couldn't stop laughing. He's like, "I've never met a college kid that would read Variety for fun." Uh, so he offered me the job on the spot, and I ended up working for him as an assistant. He was the head of acquisitions at Miramax, which was at the time owned by Disney. And, unfortunately, I did have a lot of like day-to-day interaction with Harvey Weinstein, which was definitely a learning experience, and also sort of a way to see like how not to treat people. And you know, you think of everything that he did, I would do the opposite. And I remember even calling my mom on my first day of work at lunch, just saying, I've never met someone who has such poor manners. You know, how is that, you know, acceptable? You know, maybe
and rewarded, right? Like
rewarded.
Acceptable, and then you see, is this what I have to be successful in this business?
And you know, maybe it's because I'm Southern or whatever, but I couldn't believe just how like disrespectful he was, and just disgusting. And you know, obviously, I was intuitive and right, like he's not, you know, he's a horrible human being. But my boss left that company, left Miramax after me being there for a year, and I went and worked with him because I had developed a really strong relationship with him, and he was starting a domestic sales business. So when we were at Miramax, we were buying completed films from domestic sales agents, and really at the top of the food chain there. And then he started brokering deals, and you know, I got to learn about how to start a business and what it was like to work for yourself, and sort of the pros and cons of doing that. And it was a really great experience. But at that time, you know, I had just been there for 9/11, and you know, the winters just weren't really suited for me, and sharing a 600-foot apartment with a dude who, you know, paying $3,500 of rent, it just, none of it really worked. And I knew I needed to get to LA. So in order for me to get to LA, I didn't know anyone other than a few people, whereas in New York, I knew tons of people from either college or from my older brother's friends. So I ended up applying to graduate school because I never really went to film school. I felt like it would be a good way to get me to LA and give me some infrastructure. And so I applied to, you know, USC and UCLA and AFI, and I got into all three schools. And again, keep in mind that I was 24 at the time. I made the decision to go to USC based on their college football team, and they were the national champions. And because I didn't have a good college football experience at Vanderbilt, so probably not the most mature way to make a decision, but it really worked out.
Yeah.
You know, I quickly made some really good friends at USC, and one of my friends ended up setting me up with her best friend from high school, who's now my wife of 13 years, and we have 2 kids. So there you go. But the problem with me, and I'll say this every time anyone asks, you know, what is like your biggest weakness? It's I don't have a lot of patience. And while I was in school, I found myself very bored and nervous that I was just going to come out of 2 years of graduate school and get the exact same job I had before I went into school. So I said, you know, I'm not going to waste any time. You know, I'm going to do school. I'm going to do the best I can. But, you know, there's a lot of downtime, and especially during the day. So I really thought I need to meet as many people as I can, and you know, increase my network and really understand LA and make sure this is a place I want to be, because I knew in order to sort of stay in the business that LA would be my home for forever. And so I ended up just, you know, whoever would sit down with me, and you know, I ended up making a ton of contacts those 2 years. I ended up running into someone who went to Vanderbilt where I had gone, who introduced me to a filmmaker client of his. And next thing you know, I'm co-producing a movie while I'm in graduate school that we made for $3.5 million with like Greg Kinnear and Peter Stormare and Jim Caviezel.
Incredible.
I'm turning 25 on day 2 of shooting, and also doing my thesis and not knowing what a first AD did, and just sort of faking it as much as I could.
I mean, this idea of the lack of patience, I think, runs amok amongst most producers, where it is a double-edged sword. It's the very thing that makes you so fantastic, but can also kill you. It's like your Achilles heel, your kryptonite. But it seems like that it, you know, with a negative lens, it's lack of patience, but with a positive lens, it's hustle, right? So yeah. Where do you feel like this, for you, this fire comes from? Like, have you always been this way about everything in your life? Or did you come here and realize somehow you jumped ahead a few levels and you saw the whole picture of what this industry was, and you went, all right, for me to make these big moves, I got to start doing all this now. I can't wait to blah, blah, blah.
Yeah. I mean, I think it comes to just an inherent drive I have. I mean, I'm a middle child, and I have a classic sort of middle child syndrome.
Likewise.
Right. My older brother and my younger brother have, you know, dark hair and dark skin, and they work in a family business that's 3 generations, and it was just never for me.
Yeah.
And always sort of had, overachieving brothers and an overachieving family, and, having to sort of stick out in that group, you have to kind of make some noise. And there's ways to make noise. There's positive ways and negative ways. And I try to be more on the positive side. But, I am a highly motivated person, a highly ambitious person. And I also loved what I was doing. I mean, the fact that is like, I love the business aspect. I love my spreadsheets and I love my budgets. But I also love the creative, and I love, working with writers and filmmakers and, documentarians, and telling stories and telling true stories, and spreading the word.
Yeah.
And I think that's part of it too, where, I get up in the morning, still 15, 16 years into my career, and I'm still super excited. I have my crazy, I'll show you my crazy psycho. I know this is audio, but my crazy psycho to-do list.
No, there'll be a video of this on YouTube. Look at this. This is
color coded and all that. And it's like, I love this. It doesn't overwhelm me. And, I have I email myself, notes that I wake up in the middle of the night and send to myself. I don't even remember sending them, but it's, my mind is always spinning. And I think part of it is just sort of how I'm wired. And, it does take a specific type of person for this job.
Yes.
And you need to be able to multitask and think about everything and talk, to financiers and banks and lawyers, but also talk to creatives and actors and writers and directors.
Right.
Production designers, and anyone. And I think it's a very unique skill set that's not for everyone.
Right. Well, it's having the language to speak these different ways of communicating with these different people that require a certain approach and how you're going to communicate your needs and all of the things. And it takes, I think, the capital P producer, somebody who's well-rounded and kind of understands all of that. It isn't just, I don't want to say stuck like it's a negative thing, but some people just thrive in line producing and that's all they want to do. Or some people just want to be on the distribution side. And I think when Hollywood began and the producer title was created, it was one person, maybe two, that kind of did it all. You had to really understand it all. And throughout time, it sort of became compartmentalized where you do this one thing and then you're kind of done and you become a specialist in that. And I think this time we're in some ways, is sort of reverting back to this older model
100%.
of like, you have to know how to do it all. Like, you can't just be the person who just does this one thing if you want to continue to find success and have longevity. But I want to go back to, so you're 25. You're new to LA, you're in the middle of the Stark program, you're producing your first movie. What was that like? Were you like, oh shit, I don't know what I'm doing, I'm gonna figure it out? Or were you just like, what was that time like for you in making such a big leap that could have potentially failed, right?
Yeah, I mean, it was really, it was exciting, but it was nerve-wracking because I truly did not know what I was doing. I did. And I remember the night before we started shooting, I had a lot of anxiety, and I was lucky that I had partners on the project that had a little bit more experience than me, not much more, but a really good line producer who I'm still friends with, today, and who I've worked with multiple times. But it was, that was the thing. It was stressful, and also just sort of understanding that I didn't know what I was doing. So not inserting myself and not, trying to pump my chest out and try to, do things that I didn't know how to do. Sort of let the people do what they knew how to do it, and sit back and observe and watch. I wasn't the lead producer on the film. I was the co-producer, and I spent as much time as possible around everything so that I could learn, and, with my eyes and my ears open. And that was, a really valuable experience. And I was really lucky to be able to have that. But it, just like every film, you learn that, problems that come up are things that you could never in a million years imagine.
Yeah.
The Pope died during our production, and Jim Caviezel, who was coming off of the Passion of the Christ, went to the Vatican for the funeral just in the middle of the work week and flew on Air Force One. And again, there's no sort of contingency plan for like, what do you do if the Pope dies and your lead actor just goes to Italy for 3 days with the President of the United States? That's not something that
you cannot prepare for that. Yeah, and production is amazing that way, because it's like, even if you went through the entire list of all the things that could go wrong and you have potential solutions for that, there'll always be that one thing you could have never thought about, and that'll be the thing that like marks that production with the challenge that you're like, this is insane. It's almost comical, honestly.
That's, in the second week of shooting that happened, or the third to last night of shooting, one of our lead actors the stunt goes wrong and his nose explodes, literally broken nose. And he's an actor I've worked with, I think 4 times since, and he's
Wow.
still dealing with the after effect of like not going to the hospital that night and finishing the day because he was just such a team player. But then, stuff like that, we got flipped by the union. I didn't really understand what that meant. So learning about sort of how the unions work, all that. So it was a really valuable experience. And I will say, looking back, I've had those issues aren't even in the top 10, and I'm sure you can relate to that of what happened on movie sets. But it was that thing that you just sort of have to keep your head on a swivel and always be sort of looking at all angles and trying to sort of always problem solve and fix. And I've said this a couple of times to people when there's like junior producers or producing partners that have less experience. It's okay. It's okay to sort of be around and help. And it's okay if you can't fix any problems, but just don't cause any problems. And that was, I think, something that, as chaotic as production is in movies and television and making all these things, as long as you're sort of additive, even if you can't be additive, as long as you're not causing problems, posting on your social media or something that, tips off the union on a non-union show, just
right.
that, so it's just like, again, you don't have to solve every problem, but try not to cause any problems.
Yeah. Very
and that's
well said.
sort of, can happen with sort of inexperienced people. But this is a business of mentorship, and that's how people learn. Because school is great, but you don't really learn anything until you're doing it.
Yeah.
And I remember while I was in school that second year, my last year at USC, we were making that film, and I went and talked to the head of the program, and I said, I want this film to be my thesis and not some hypothetical situation. And he wouldn't allow it because he said I was, it didn't make sense to him. And I was like, well, it doesn't make sense to me that the hypothetical film is my thesis and not something that you guys are teaching us to get. The goal is to do what I'm doing. I'm literally shooting nights, in downtown LA with movie stars and, dealing with all this stuff that we've been talking about for 2 years. And I would love to just sort of use that budget, that schedule, that marketing plan, all that stuff is my thesis. And he's like, no, I'm not going to do it. So I got like a, C- on my thesis.
Oh, wow.
I did it in like 2 days on a weekend, but then the movie that I made, we doubled up when we sold it. So I'll take the double up on the sale versus my C- on my
on a hypothetical thing. Well, and so you went through this experience. Suffice it to say, you earned your stripes, right? And you survived the chaos that is production. On the other side of it, clearly something about it made you go, all right, cool, sign me up. I want to do this for the rest of my life, right? So what was that thing?
And again, I think it is just like the chaos and, the having to spin a lot of plates and having to sort of, problem solve, but also at the end of the day, it's not rocket science. These aren't life and death situations. It is, we're making movies. And, I say this a lot, like right before we start shooting, I thank the crew and say like, thanks for letting me play in your sandbox, because it is a sandbox. Yep. And it's really fun. And, if you're not having fun making the movies, then you shouldn't be doing it. And I've been involved with projects where either the filmmaker or cast member or another producer has made it sort of, miserable. And that's not for me. For me, at least every day of shooting should be like summer camp.
Yes.
And you sacrifice a ton to do this. Your health. I always get sick after every movie.
Yep.
Time away from your family. Rarely do we get to shoot in our hometowns, and I've had to leave town for 3-4 months at a time. And so things like that, so it has to be fun. It has to be worth it. And honestly, it's like, you don't do it for the money. I mean, most independent producers don't make a lot of money. And, and you have to sort of, for everyone that does make money, you're going to have 3 that you don't.
Right.
And so in order to do it, it has to be, at least my personality is, it has to be an enjoyable experience for everyone involved.
Yes. It's nice to have guests on and fellow producers who it's like this echo chamber. I've been speaking on the podcast so many times. I speak this in my life and in my work, and I'm sure you would hopefully know this since we just worked together, but it's really all about the journey, because that you cannot control the outcome of any project. You can go in with the best of intentions, but if the journey, the experience of making that, how you're going to show up every day and how you're going to relate to your creatives and all of the things, if that is miserable, like, it doesn't matter if the project turns out to be the best thing you've ever, perceivably to an audience, the best thing that you've ever done, because that experience will always be tainted for you. And I have had definitely my share of projects that were very impressive on paper and almost left the business because the experience of working with these people were so miserable. And it's like, it's not that important, but it is. It's everything. Being a storyteller, getting to be a facilitator for artists, getting to have the responsibility to choose the stories that can shape culture and conversations internationally, like, that is huge, right? That is not something I personally take lightly. However, I also have to think about my livelihood and my health and my mental health and my well-being. And so the cost cannot be that high, because you're dealing with people that are miserable because they have personal reasons that they need to deal with in therapy, that they're bringing into something, to your point, that should be fun, that should be easy, that will be challenging. But like, can we all come together in the face of challenge and figure it out? Because it's a human-made problem, thus there is a human-made solution for it. Unless somebody dies, then you figure that out too. But generally speaking, like, it has to be that. It has to be fun. Otherwise, why are you doing it? And I think that gets imprinted. I think it gets imprinted in the project. And if you are having a blast, most of the time production is hard. I don't mean to make anyone believe it's just like a party, but generally speaking, you're having fun in these challenging moments. Otherwise, it's like, man, it's just too hard not to, and so I'm glad you're saying that, because I preach this so much. And when someone else gets to say it, it's like an echo chamber for this nugget that I think is the secret to longevity in our business, honestly.
And one of the things I'm most proud of is the sort of frequent collaborators I have. Filmmakers I typically work with, multiple times. And there's a reason. I think it's because of the mutual respect of me being, good at my job, and me also allowing them to he or she do the best version of their job. And I say it to directors all the time. I believe this is a director's medium, and I'm in awe of directing, and I could never be a director. And if I would have to take like a ton of medication to be a director, frankly. And my job is to sort of eliminate all the noise and make it so that he or she can do the best job that they can.
Yeah.
And if I'm not doing my job well, then they're not going to be able to do their job well. They also have to understand that my process is a little chaotic, and I'm also, they're hyper focused on one thing, and I'm probably juggling 6 things, but they don't need to ever know that. I've never had a director tell me they need more attention. I've had directors saying, I don't know how you give me so much attention, but I'm able to sort of make it work because of who I am. And that thing, it's like, this isn't a job. Producing is not a job for you to sort of do one project at a time, because you just never know what's going to go and what's not going to happen. And there's going to be a pandemic or a writer's strike or blah, blah, blah. So you always have to, kind of, spin a lot of plates. And every now and then it does happen where you get lucky and you've got multiple things happening at the same time. I mean, I'm currently in production of 12 projects.
It's insane. It's insane. I mean, so 2 questions on what you just said. The first is, what is it you think about the filmmakers that you attract, that is there a common thread between how they approach the work that makes you personally as a producer want to keep working with them, aside from being really good at the creative part of it? But in speaking of that journey and the experience, if you could, is there like a common thread, a nugget that you're like, this is the quality that is required?
It comes down to respect. I think it's understanding when I say no, it's not because I'm out to get them. It's because I've gone through every single scenario that, and I want to say yes to every single request or question. But when I say no, they're like, okay, obviously Ross isn't doing that because he's mad or for any other reason other than it's not feasible. Or, or they're respectful. The fact is like, sure, you can do that. But then, you can say, yeah, I can say yes to A, but B, C, D, and E are going to have to change.
Yeah.
And so for a filmmaker to understand, when we give them that feedback, that it's coming from a place that we are trying to make all of their wishes and dreams come true, but sometimes it's not possible. I've had a filmmaker who I've had to take aside and say, you understand that I didn't wake up this morning to ruin your day. He just thought every single thing that I did was I was out to get him. I go, there's no reason. I've deferred 100% of my fee on this film. And what is it in it for me to make it impossible for you to do your job?
Yeah.
What you're asking to do is impossible considering the parameters that exist for this film. This was a while ago. We were actually shooting on film, and he was shooting 35,000 feet a day of film when we were budgeted for 10,000 feet of film a day, and it just didn't work. And it just wasn't sustainable. And it was because of his sort of inexperience, I think, and insecurity of what he was getting. And I recognized that, and so I knew I needed to be delicate about it. But I also had to explain to him, it's like, we are out of film. We've gone through our entire film budget in 1 week, and we still have 4 weeks to go. So if we're going to keep on that pace, which we can, then we need to change other parts of the production plan.
Right.
And he just thought I was being mean.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, it's a very inherently emotional business. I think that's the part that the business, the art, the commerce, all of that, but it is highly emotional people trying to do something that isn't surgery. It isn't brain cancer surgery, but it requires a certain finesse and a certain stamina and like you said, a trust and a respect for the people that you're collaborating with. I think oftentimes, I'm at a place in my career where I get a lot of younger people coming to me, writers, filmmakers, just like desperate to find a producer, desperate to find a thing. And it's like, you have to be really careful who you get into that relationship with, because it is very delicate. And if you're not on the same wavelength, if you cannot have that mutual respect and trust in each other, it's not going to work out. It doesn't matter how good the thing is. Like, that has to be there from the onset. So take the time, like dating, to find that thing versus just getting in with everybody. Although, yes, you're going to grow and learn from that experience for sure if you don't, and that's going to inform your path going forward. But like taking that time, which I know sucks because like a lot of people in this business are impatient. It's, it's a business of impatient, emotional people, myself included. It's what makes it amazing and magical, but also like fucking crazy sometimes where you're like, what is my life? Which anyway, but I want to get to, so at what point in your career did you then decide you wanted to have Campfire and you wanted to have this company, and how you plan to structure it to where you guys are now, which is insane. The amount of success you guys have had for being so young and having 12 projects in production, it's bananas.
Yeah, I mean, I sort of look at a couple of moments in my career where I've really pivoted. And, when I started out, I started a company to make independent film and using sort of the international pre-sales model. And it was me and a buddy and assistant. And, we just sort of, rubbed two nickels together to try to make a dime. And I was able to do that at the time because, the industry was different. DVD and Blu-ray was the source of revenue, and people were making money on, pre-selling films in France and Spain and Germany. And I've been fortunate where I've seen trends that were emerging, I think a little bit before other people were able to see it. And so I saw that wasn't a viable business, or was about to become not a viable business, leading up to sort of the economic crash in the 2008. Where I had a film in Sundance, and, there was only 6 U.S. distributors. All of them had either disappeared or not come to Sundance.
Wow.
And I realized, okay, things aren't going to work. So I have to figure out, how I can continue to do what I'm doing, but also make a living doing it. And, in my early 20s, it was a lot easier to be broke. But as I was getting older, I, was about to get married. I had family plans. I had, other goals that I wanted to hit. So I had to really reevaluate that business model. And, as DVD and Blu-ray went away, transactional VOD came in, which is like, renting a movie on iTunes. But it wasn't like it replaced DVD and Blu-ray revenue dollar for dollar. It probably only replaced a third DVD and Blu-ray revenue. So I realized that the way to make movies is to make them for, significantly less. So I went from making, $5 million movies to $500,000 movies.
Wow.
And again, was really playing for the upside and taking next to no fees, working on a film for a year, hoping it gets into one of 3 film festivals that people care about, and then selling it. Again, not a business model. So I looked at that, and I did that for a long time, but realized that, I had 1 film that could be a hit, but I have 3 that aren't. And then there you go. I've worked for 4 years without making much of a fee.
Yeah.
So started to really think, okay, I need to build a business. I can't really, this isn't a hobby for me. This is my career. And at the time I had partners that it was more of a hobby and not a career. So I wanted to become a little bit more sort of grown up or formalized. And I partnered up with an international distribution company, and then they gave me some seed money. And the plan was for them to sell my films internationally. My business partner at the time was we were an independent. He was an independent domestic sales rep. So he
Kevin,
would
right? Kevin
Kevin,
Yushin?
yeah, Kevin Iwachina. So Kevin would sell the films domestically, and I would sell internationally. And at that time, the agencies weren't touching films for domestic distribution because it was such a hard game because there was not a lot of buyers. So Kevin and I were able to really focus and put our head down and build out his sales business while I was building out a production business. And we first started out, all of our revenue came from domestic sales, which I knew from the time that I worked in domestic sales in New York. And Kevin was able to sort of allow me to build out our production business. Simultaneously, the world started to change again. And, it ended up getting to the point where our domestic sales business wasn't doing as great, but our production business was doing much better. And the roles became reversed. And so Kevin and I did that for about 5 years. But what I noticed was that the domestic sales business outside of the agencies was just not a viable business because the agencies had gone all in on that business. The WME and UTA and CA, where they used to sort of let us take these, $500,000 movies, $700,000 movies that were premiering at Sundance because they didn't want to touch them. But then, they started scaling up their businesses, and we're competing with them to sign, $125,000 film that's premiering at midnight at Tribeca.
Right.
So after 5 years, Kevin and I had kind of our State of the Union. And I said, look, I don't want to be a part of the domestic sales business. You don't like the production business. Let's just break up and be friends. And I'm going to take the production business and you take the sales business, and that's it. And we hugged it out and everything was fine. And then I turned that business, the production business, into Campfire. And I remained partners with the international sales company that we had been working with for about 2 years. But then they ended up becoming, not a good company, frankly. Their issues really arose where they had a ton of debt, and the international distribution business started crashing, and they ended up being bought by a company out of Toronto. So I wake up on a Tuesday morning and I have a new business partner and people that I don't really know. This is the early stages of Campfire. So I gave that a year of them being my partner, and again, I don't know if it was intuition or what, but I didn't see how their business model was going to work. They were acquiring a bunch of companies, all over the US and Canada that were semi-complementary, but also, it just didn't make sense. They wanted to be this sort of holding company with all these little companies, but there wasn't a lot of synergy. The operators of the holding company didn't exactly know what they were doing. And so I went to them because I was under sort of an employment contract with Campfire, even though I was the co-owner of it with them. And I said, look, my 5 years are up. On Monday, I'm leaving, or let me buy you guys out.
What year was that?
This was 2018.
Whoa.
Yeah.
That's like yesterday.
Yeah, 2 years ago. And so I took a second mortgage out on my home, which is, rule number one, never do that. But I was betting on myself, and I believed in myself, and I also knew that I couldn't sustain the relationship with them. And I said, here's the number. I'm not going to give you $1 more, and you either take this and give me your half of the company, or on Monday I'm starting a new company, and I'll call it Bonfire. And they took the money. And
Wow.
fast forward 14 months to that day, they filed for bankruptcy.
Dude.
So I obviously knew what was going on.
You saw the writing on the wall. Yeah.
So with Campfire, so that was really what I call the birth of Campfire that exists now, the Campfire that you know.
Yeah. Wow.
We're really 2 years old, probably to the day.
That is insane. And I'm even more impressed then. It's like amazing.
So I should look it up, but it was probably, around the 18th, 19th, or 20th when we closed, me buying them out and taking full ownership of the company. But without them as my partner, who were truly an albatross around my neck, and also seeing the shifting trends in the business, I was then able to really put my head down and build what you now know as the company. And it's really become a hybrid sort of nonfiction and fiction company. I think the last 2 years, I've probably put a lot more of my energy into nonfiction because it's, we're having this great moment in nonfiction.
Yeah.
But we still, I made a movie for Netflix last year. We have a TV series with Netflix. We're developing a bunch of scripted TV. We have a scripted show in development at HBO Max. But at the end of the day, besides my dog barking, at the end of the day, it was, again, sort of noticing that independent film is not a viable business. And so on the film side, I started working with Netflix about 5 years ago, and I was, I did the first ever Netflix independent film, which is in their sort of sub $10 million model, and I've done 8 of those right now.
Wow.
And realizing that Netflix really values the producer and wants to make sure that the producer has all the tools to make these films and make sure that the producers are compensated for their work, which in indie film, as I'm sure
it's
you
huge.
know.
Yeah.
Yeah, in indie film, as you know, is no one expects the producers to get paid,
which is beyond me. It's just like the stamina you have to sustain that for the entire team and to be all of the roles you have to play as a producer. It's boggling. I had this conversation with someone else I recorded with, that there's this adage of the expectation that producers should be the first people to cut their fees or waive their fees altogether. It's just, I wonder where that comes from.
It doesn't make any sense, especially if the producer has all the liability. If there's a budget overage or an accident or whatever, it's the producer's name that's on it.
Yep.
The producers are the ones that are signing the guild assumption agreements and all that.
Yep.
But with independent film, we got to the point where, I was too old to just do it for fun. And with the sort of responsibilities I had in my life. So I really stepped away from that part of the business and focused on, my relationship with Netflix and making these films with them, which I'm really proud of. And, I got to do the first ever Stephen King film with them. And, we had films at South by, and we've had a great run with them. And it's been fun to watch that part of their company grow. And, when I first started working with Netflix, the indie film group had 3 or 4 executives, and now I think they have 30.
Wow.
And,
yeah.
I've done 8 movies, and I think they do about 40 a year. So that's been a real fun ride. But again, moving as I've gotten older, sort of transitioning to almost full-time nonfiction has also been really rewarding.
Yeah.
And I'm fortunate that I get to work with, some of the best filmmakers in the world. And in the results of our projects, I think they're really high end and compelling. We did a doc called The Innocent Man, which was a series, and I read that book in 2007, and it took me 10 years to get on the phone with John Grisham, and I talked him into a handshake deal to give me the rights. And fast forward 2 years later from that call, one of the subjects of the book and of the series was released from prison after 36 years. And I can't take credit for him being released, but I know we sure helped. I know the existence of our documentary helped him get out of prison. And that, between being a part of the team that did Jiro Dreams of Sushi and
incredible, by the way, like
this John Grisham book, it really gave me some credibility in the space and has allowed me over the last 3 years to become sort of one of the more premier content providers of premium fiction.
So huge responsibility. I mean, a lot of, I think it's like, you have this accolade, but now you have this pressure on you to always deliver at that caliber or more, and I've heard from people who scale up and reach these upper echelons of our industry that it's exciting. But there is this expectation that's different. Like the work never really gets easier. It just gets more refined in that way. And as someone who is a producer who is very active, like you said, with your projects, and you do have a team at Campfire, and you are the CEO of this company, like how do you juggle all of that and still have the bandwidth to be a dad and a husband and have other things in your life that you get to do?
I mean, look, my staff. I have like a first-class staff.
Absolutely.
I'm very, very lucky, and I never had that before. I mean, even having an assistant that actually was a really good assistant for the first time was a game changer for me. And, my head of production and my head of development and everyone who works under them are first class. And I'm very fortunate. And the hardest thing for me is I want to be on every shoot. I want to be on the weeds, but I also know that it's not possible anymore.
Right.
I have such a commitment to quality, and that, I'm watching every cut. I'm on every call. I'm on every, and it's long days and it's exhausting, but I'm not complaining.
Yeah.
I'm fortunate that we work with such great filmmakers that also make my job a lot easier, and the staff is so strong. And people at the company, and you've experienced it firsthand, have share the same passion and same energy that I have for these projects. And yeah, there are things that I shouldn't be doing at my level, but I do it because I love it. And I have no problem like getting my hands dirty into a movie magic budget. And Ross Gerard, my head of production, is just like, "Why are you doing this?" It's like, "Because I like it." Uh,
Yeah.
and I have no problem showing up and sitting in an unair conditioned room for 6 hours while someone's being interviewed, because
Yep.
again, it's fascinating for me. And I enjoy, my nights are very much spent watching rough cuts, like pretty much 7 days a week, watching rough cuts, because I enjoy it, but I'm also continuously learning, and I do have a commitment to quality, and I probably micromanage a little bit, but I will say, my biggest weakness is my inability to delegate. But I think over the last 2 years, as the company's really grown, I've been able to delegate more and more.
Yeah, you have to let go a little bit. I mean, so then what is it that Ross does to fill his well, to fill yourself with this amount of energy and stamina that is required to show up every day for yourself, for your staff, for your filmmakers, for Netflix, for your wife, for your kids? Like, what does that look like for you? Self care.
Self-care is an issue.
A lot of producers
Yeah,
struggle with it. That's why I like to ask.
I grew up pretty conservative in Texas, and my family gives me a hard time, but I'm a big believer in acupuncture and massage, and I take a lot of supplements, and acupuncture is really something that I think is my biggest stress relief. And I take a lot of pride in being present for my family and my kids, and I really enjoy it, doing that. But yeah, it is, the work-life balance is a challenge. And honestly, being at home these last few months, it's been really eye-opening to me too, that I've realized that I don't need to work at the office until 8 p.m., that I can come home at 5 and have dinner with my wife and my kids, help with bedtime, and then go back to the computer.
Hmm.
But there isn't a lot of, I don't have a lot of hobbies. Like I don't play golf, and can't go to the movies right now.
Yeah.
But it is a struggle. But I I'm not complaining. I know a lot of people my age that haven't found their calling and are always struggling to figure out what it is that they want to do. And
Yeah.
I'm fortunate. Not every day is a great day, but since 2003, I've known that this is what I want to do, and I get to do it.
Yeah.
And I've made a lot of mistakes, and I try not to repeat history. But at the end of the day, like for every mistake, I've made 5 great decisions too.
Yeah. So on that note, the name of my show is Life with Kaka because it's a cute, fun play on my nickname, but it also is because I'm personally obsessed with talking about the messy parts of the journey and the messy parts that when you look at someone's career or someone's life, we create this there's this impression that gets created, right? Like this is your career's in full bloom, all these things are happening and you're just like crushing it, and we see people's names in the trades and all the cool things they're doing, but we all know how messy it is to get there. And so I'd love for you to speak to some of these messy parts of your career, whether it's a specific experience that you went through, but how you navigate that, right? Like how you go through something that makes you almost leave the business, makes you almost do the thing, but then you choose not to. So what is the messy thing? And then what is that moment that for you makes you just keep going?
I mean, I need like 50 hours to tell you the messy things that
Well,
I did,
yes.
but
Give me like some highlights,
I would say
some
this:
juicy ones.
talking about patience, there was a time in my career early on where there were film opportunities with big movie stars and a lot more notoriety, but the people sort of running those projects, the producers, were criminals. And if you try to find them in 2019 or 2020, they're actually in jail. And I think I made some choices and partnerships early on because of my lack of patience that I regret. And it cost me a lot of money, and it cost me some relationships. And but what I got out of it is, and I will say, I don't regret those decisions because I learned so much. I
Mm-hmm.
learned that there is like a criminal element to our business, and to try to stay away from that as much as possible. But the main thing I took away is like, I don't make the same mistake twice. I don't repeat history. I've realized that, many times I've almost been bankrupt. I've almost, had, pretty horrible things happen personally that are a result of mistakes I made in my career. And I'm glad that those things happened because it has made me the person that I am today. And I know how to deal with adversity a lot better. But again, I'm not going to make that mistake again. I know who I'm getting into business with. I do the due diligence. I ask around. And, earlier in my career, I had to sort of beg to become part of a project. And now projects come to me and I don't have to do that. But, this sort of need for me to sort of leapfrog the system and try to do things differently, really caused a lot of problems for me. And sometimes you just have to sort of sit back and let things happen and unfold in real time instead of trying to make things happen in sort of a hyperspeed.
So you've never had moments throughout your journey where shit got so hard that you were like, I'm gonna go see what's up with my family's business. I'm gonna go. This is not for me. Like, and if you did, then what was the thing that reeled you back in?
I mean, I definitely had moments like that, and I think
Yeah.
I'm very fortunate with the support of my family. Where if I ever had that conversation with my father, my older brother, my mom, they would be the ones who like, you're not ready. It's not time for you to give up. And
Yeah.
my wife has been along the path with me since we met in, let me think, 2003, yeah, we met in 2003. So she's been, my biggest fan and has also been there to listen and to, again, make sure that I don't, again, make a mistake, make a decision. Partly I think it's because she doesn't want to move and live in Houston, but
Whatever it takes, right? Whatever drives
right.
her.
But I think I've just been really fortunate with between my wife and my family and their support. When things got bad, that they're the ones that are talking me out of making like a drastic decision that is not the right decision for me.
How do you feel producing has defined you?
It's 100% who I am.
Yeah.
People, I live and breathe my job and my family. I don't have any hobbies. I don't really do anything else besides that. But I don't have a problem with it.
Yeah.
I love it, and I'm really proud of the content that I've made over the years. And I've made some real turkeys, and I've made some really quality films
Yeah.
and projects. And I'm not afraid to say that I produced Who's Your Caddy, which is one of the dumbest movies ever made, which somehow is Bill Clinton's favorite movie.
Wow.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's very funny. But I've also, in the same breath, I can say I made, Barack Obama's favorite movie and Bob Iger's favorite movie and Tom Brady's favorite movie, which is, Jiro Dreams of Sushi. And I got someone out of prison, and we have a project that we're out with right now about someone who's on death row, and we have a podcast about 10 people who it's called Abuse of Power, and it's hosted by David Rudolph, who is the defense attorney from The Staircase.
Yeah.
Staircase is the original true crime doc series. It
Yeah.
didn't exist before that. And on Christmas Eve 2 years ago, I got a DM from Twitter from David about The Innocent Man. And that's someone I always looked up to, and I never thought in a million years that I would meet him. And now I can fast forward and say he's a good friend of mine. And he just spent a year doing this podcast with him and his wife. And I'm so proud of that, and proud of what's happening with it, and some the cases and stuff that we talk about. But 15 years ago when I watched The Staircase, I never thought I'd be friends with the defense attorney, who's a legend. And
Yeah.
and that's the kind of stuff that's just when you talk about defining me, like that's the stuff that I'm so proud of.
Yeah. What do you love most about it?
I think it's the diversity and storytelling, and the diversity just in general, like of the people that I'm meeting, and I meeting writers and directors and designers and prop people, and from craft service, and all of those, and the relationships I've made. I've got friends all over the world from this business. This week we needed to find a dock crew in Serbia, and I knew somebody, and I don't know how I know that person, but I knew someone that's in Serbia. I've made dear friends in Canada from shooting there, dear friends in New Mexico, going to the film festivals and having films at South by and Sundance and Tribeca, and just all of that excitement. And I was driving by yesterday, and there was a big FX on Hulu billboard on La Cienega, And one of the shows was my show, which is a show that I spent 2.5 years making, called The Most Dangerous Animal of All.
Yeah.
It's just a really rewarding feeling that people are seeing the stuff that we're doing and liking it.
Yeah. What do you think then is a big misconception that people have about the business or producing specifically, and really what it takes?
I mean, the biggest misconception, I think, outside the business is that it's just super glamorous and glitzy. There's nothing glamorous about this job.
No, sir.
Night shoots and craft service and black stale coffee.
Getting fat and just not sleeping well.
Yeah. There's nothing glamorous about it. So I think that is definitely a misconception, and it's not, going to premieres and dinners with movie stars and any of that stuff. It's a business, and I think people don't know that. And I say it a lot of the times, it's like, this is show business, and this is my career, and this is how I pay my mortgage, and I pay my bills, and I pay for my family, and it is my job. And I think sometimes people outside of this business who are always trying to get in do think it's like an opportunity to come to LA and go to Nobu and go to the Soho House and all that. Like, that's not what I do.
Right. Like they're in an episode of Entourage, right?
Correct. and our business isn't, if you're in it for your career, that's not realistic. There are people that are in it and that's how they do it, and that's great. That's not me.
So then what's the secret to the stamina that is required and the longevity for this business, for the people who are in it and maybe are mid-level, have been in it for a decade plus?
Create your own work. You can't sit around and wait for your phone to ring. It's getting in front of people's faces. If you're in slow time, it's like, okay, here are people who I admire, reach out. 9 out of 10 of those people will sit down and have coffee, or in this world, have a Zoom with you. But it's you can't just let things come to you. You have to make things happen.
Yeah.
And I give that advice to filmmakers, to writers, to producers all the time. No one is going to do you a favor in this business because everyone is trying to make it themselves. So if you find yourself out of work, it's your fault, and don't blame anybody else. And either figure out how to get back in front of people that potentially could hire you. Be out and about in a way that isn't like on social media because you're at Soho House, but it's like you're on social media because you spent 10 days at Sundance and watched 300 movies because you wanted to make contacts and to see what films are working, what films are doing. Like, that stuff, I think, is what I would look at when I'm hiring someone, is the type of producer they want to be, one that actually does stuff, or one that talks about it. And I want to be involved with people that do stuff.
Exactly.
That's why we hired you.
I am a stuff doer, hence this podcast. Like, I'm doing this I've actually sustained this podcast while in active production and staying up till 3 a.m, editing when I had a 6 a.m. call, because it's just, I think for me too, it's like, I am an immigrant, there's so many odds that have been stacked against me from birth. Like, I shouldn't be here, and I am here, and I'm proud to be here. And I've sustained, actually next week will be my 14-year LA-versary. So it's like, I've defied a lot of odds that are insurmountable, and there's no reason why I should be here. So I take that very seriously. I take that seriously, and I think you have to lean into when you also have the energy and the bandwidth and whatever is happening in these different areas of your life. Like right now with COVID, well, there's a lot of things we cannot do, right? But what can you do? What can you do? What is in your control? Again, the journey, this part of the journey. Okay, let's connect with people. Let's learn from people. Let's dive deep into watching more movies and more shows, and like expanding your world on the creative side, because maybe I don't get to dive deep into production right now. And I think that's such an important thing. And a mistake a lot of people make, to your point, is not just waiting around, but also thinking that they need to figure out what other people want, as opposed to like, no, go be a person who is active in your own life. Go be a doer, not just in the career path, but in your life. Go experience the world. I mean, as much as you can during COVID, but like, go see what this world is, and then bring that back to the work that you do, and have a point of view. If you're a creative, or even as a producer, like, have a point of view, have a lens, a perspective on what it is, because that's the thing that makes you intrinsically exciting and interesting to any of these collaborators you mentioned, to get to have a show with Netflix and all of that. But to think that there's some secret recipe or secret sauce you're going to unlock by just asking everybody else what they want, it is honestly heartbreaking. And I see a lot of people who are trying to break into the business make that mistake, and thus they just like this regurgitation of repeating a similar thing that honestly like no one wants. It's like a shit pie. It's like nobody wants to eat that.
And look, it's to each its own is what motivates you. But in
Yeah.
film school, I got advice from one teacher, and it was probably the best advice I got. He goes, "There's two types of producers. There's the producers that go out and make stuff and do stuff, and it's their job and they love it. And then there's the kind of producers who you walk into their office and it's nothing but framed photos of them with movie stars." And
That's right.
and so I've always thought about that, and I've had many meetings with people, and I've noticed like their walls are filled with pictures with them on framed photos with movie stars, or that's their Facebook post, where it's not, it's fine to post about your movie that you're proud of, but to post about a movie you're proud of, and in that post it's a picture of you and a movie star, it's not about the movie, it's about like, look at me, I know someone famous.
Yeah.
And again, so that it just shows that it's really like the way I define how people produce. Now, I will be the first to admit, one time I did post a picture of me with the movie star, but it was The Rock, and I think that doesn't count.
But that doesn't count. The Rock is amazing. No.
Right. And I'm a wrestling
he
fan.
Transcends.
Right. And I'm a wrestling fan first and foremost. So anyone listening saying, well, I have seen Ross post about with him with the movie star, it was The Rock. And I stand by that post. And
yes,
my mother-in-law put it in her own Christmas card, that photo of me with The Rock. But
I think that's, yes, if that's the exception, then I think that's wonderful. There's nothing wrong with you taking photos with movie stars. I have photos with movie stars I've worked with because I'm proud of the movie. I'm proud of the experience. I'm proud of having been able to go on the journey with these people who happen to be famous and movie stars who've made that experience worthwhile. Like, there's this ingenuous thing. And I think that's where that misconception comes from, because the media, Instagram, whatever, we tends to only focus on the kinds of producers who are posting their photos with movie stars, and nobody's looking at the 90% of other producers that aren't doing that are the ones actually doing the work to sustain the business. Yeah.
Yeah. And like my office is filled with our movie posters, and I'm really proud of the movies, and I'm proud of the people that were in it, of course, but I didn't make that movie so I could be hanging out with someone famous. I made that movie because I had a story I wanted to tell.
Exactly. Which is why so much of the focus of the show, I'm not interested in your experience working with a famous movie star or a famous, filmmaker. I mean, that's awesome and impressive. Great. But it's like the behind the scenes realities of what it is, to me, that is way more interesting, and not enough people, I think, shine a light on these realities, so that I say anybody who's trying to get in the business or stay in the business, like, we want you. We welcome you with open arms. Just know what you're getting into. And when I started out, I came out here to act, and then about 10 years or 4 years into that journey, was producing to create my own opportunities, because I couldn't wait around. The business was so different back then. YouTube was just starting. I was never like Latina enough or white enough. Nobody knew what to do with me. So I was like, okay, I need to create my own opportunities. And that's what got me into producing. And then I was like, oh, like this, I didn't know this was a job, but I'm really good at this. This comes very naturally to me. And I like having all of these multiple things. But it took that shift, into finding that, and then being able to zoom out and realize, oh shit, like I had no idea the amount of work that exists before me as the actor steps on a set in my trailer and there's a coffee waiting for me, like all of the things that happen before that moment. And it actually had this opposite effect where it made me more confident as an artist, because I could now step on a set and be like, I know what every department is here doing. I know the sort of nuance of the symphony of how a set is supposed to go. And I know what my job is in this big wheel of collaboration, that it's not all about me as an actor. I'm here to do this one specific thing. And unfortunately, it's the thing that gets the most seen because it's your face on a screen, right? But you're just a representative for all of this other stuff that is happening behind you. And it changed my world,
It's back down to respect. You respect everyone else's sort of jobs and their roles. I mean, when Tom Hanks at the Golden Globes said his biggest advice to actors is be on time. Yeah. And it's like every producer in the world that's watching is like, yeah, be on time. Like, you have no idea how much that affects, the ripple effect that has on everyone who's trying to do their job and stay on time and budget and schedule and location hours and all that stuff. And if one sort of person isn't respectful to that, the whole system breaks down. And to have that come from Tom Hanks, who of anyone is allowed to do whatever he wants on a set, he can show up 2 days late with, dyed hair. He's Tom Hanks. It was just such a remarkable thing to say.
But I bet you he became Tom Hanks because of that very thing, because he
Correct.
respected people's times and what people did, and not because he was a diva and leaned into that. I think that's the mistake people make. And it's a career built, like you said, on relationships and mentorship. It's a bunch of humans. Everything is ultimately just humans getting together, trying to figure out the best way to do stuff with fancy titles, fancy accolades. But it's if you can really trust that, I think, in your journey, and just I put an emphasis on be a person of integrity, like not because of you're doing this job, because that's who you are in your life, period. And then you bring that to your work. Like if you're only here for this life once, as far as we know, like then make that life the best. And if you're going to immerse yourself and have no separation, right? Because you love the work so much and you are the work, like producing or whatever the thing is for you, like is your identity, then be a full version of yourself in that and how you're going to show up for people, because ultimately that's all you have. That's all really you can bring to the table. And so it's definitely something that is very important to me. And I preach on it on the podcast, and I actually live it. And hopefully you can attest to that. I know we didn't get to work too closely on the ground with Hysterical, the doc that I helped produce for Campfire. But I believe that very much. And I think in these conversations and reminding people that not only is it necessary, but possible, we can create a more collaborative, compassionate industry, especially right now with everything that's going on in the world. And that is very much my mission. So we are getting to the hour, which is crazy.
Yes.
So to wrap up, is there anything that you wanted to touch on that I didn't touch on? I mean, I want to ask the advice question, which is kind of obvious, but I feel like you kind of given incredible advice already. So
Thanks. Yeah, no, I appreciate you having me on and
yeah,
doing, and we had a great experience with you on our project. And I think you saw firsthand sort of what I'm about and what the company's about, and what's important to me. And it's listening to unrepresented voices and letting everyone sort of be a part of the process. And yes, everyone has their specific job, but at the end of the day, people have different life experiences that can really help shape the creative and shape the story.
Yeah.
And again, everyone can be a problem solver because of their different experience. And it's okay to speak up and raise your hand and say, you know what, Ross, this isn't the right thing to do, or maybe there's a better way we can do it. I'm totally fine with that, because as I said, I've made a ton of mistakes. And the thing that I do love so much about this job is I learn something new every day.
Yeah.
I know that's cliche, but every single day I learn something. There's no question about it.
Yeah, it's part of why I wanted to talk to you, because I think you're an impressive person, and you've been here a while, but you're still very young in your career. And I'm just so excited to see what comes next for you and for Campfire. So I'm glad to be a tiny part of that journey with y'all. So
Great. Well, thanks so much for having me.
Thank you so much, Ross.